Goodness. Are we happy? We had an extra sleep last night. Are we extra chipper? Hopefully we are. Oh, thank you. Somebody's chipper over there. Well, it's good to be with you this morning. I just want to acknowledge just one thing before we dive into this today. And this is something that we can provide more space for prayer later, but have a big week coming up, don't we, in the States, right? We've been leading up to this moment for months and months and months, if not, it feels like it goes on for years. Intentionally here at the church have been considering the stressfulness around this time of year and this time of this season for Americans. A couple weeks ago, before we started the series on the fruit of the Spirit, we did 2 talks on the election, on how to and our postures towards that. If you did not listen to that, I highly encourage you in the next couple days to pick that up. It's on our podcast. And then very specifically, we planted this fruit of the Spirit sermon series that overlapped during the course of the next few days, very specifically, and the fallout afterwards. So we know that we were very, very aware that next week we're going to have a lot of either disappointed people that show up in the room, maybe happy people, but we hope and pray that everybody here, and I hope that you would encourage the folks around you as well, and your family and your friend circles and that sort of thing, that you would remain connected to Jesus, and that you would just provide a lot of space to be with the Lord this week, that he would center your heart, into your mind, that he would give you the grace that you need to be able to walk through, and that you would realize that ultimately this is about Jesus, right? Okay. So I just want to give you a little bit of a reminder and know that we will be praying over it, and we just hope that you guys would join us in being able to nation have a peace that we would step into in this next week and not aggression or even more violence. So, okay. So today, I'm going to go ahead and start off with a viral video that maybe some of you have seen, maybe many of you have not, but let's go ahead and check this into very nicely our fruits of the Spirit for the week.
Hello. What's going on? How are you? What's new?
I finally got my apartment. Steve, I'm no longer homeless now. I used to watch Blue's Clues every day. Life is lifing, Steve. You prepare me for this. Oh, Steve, life is falling apart. I wish we could go back to looking for clues. Hi, Steve. My 10-year cancer-free anniversary is in 3 days, and I'm really excited about that. The fact that you continue to show up for us proves that it never was just a show. Thank you. I'd give anything to sit with my brother and watch you on our childhood television. You remind me of home before my parents died, before my brother died. Thank you.
Well, I just wanted to check in. You look great.
Now, did anybody recognize who that was? Yeah, some of you did. This is Steve Burns from one of the most popular kids shows on Nickelodeon. Yes!
Right. Ooh, which one of these things should...
I was a nanny actually during college, and the amount of hours that we spent looking for clues, and Steve was helping us, right? I mean, do you guys resonate with this? I mean, was this just a millennial thing, or? I mean, the kids that I babysat were millennial. I loved it. It was a great little show, and it was incredibly popular. I think the reason that this has struck such a chord, and by the way, there are tens of millions of people that have watched these videos. This isn't just one of them that he's created an entire social media around, but this is something he puts out regularly where he just listens. Relevant Magazine describes what's happening here. It feels like Steve Burns, has taken on a modern-day Mr. Rogers role. He's not solving anyone's problems directly, but by creating a space for he's helping people feel less alone, whether it's mental health, family struggles, or just the stress. Have found, and I would say other generations have found comfort in Steve's presence. I think the reason that this struck such a chord with Americans and with people that are coming across his videos is because oftentimes we are interacting in a world that seems to be pretty aggressive, doesn't it? And at times, very selfish, and to have 1 minute of somebody just saying to where you can see that it's just really evoking a lot of vulnerability and a lot of people wanting to connect, right? Be able to share what's happening. It just feels kind. This is just 1 minute, just kindness that we get in a world that shows us the exact opposite. So for today, we're going to explore not just one fruit of the Spirit. We're going to explore two. You get two for the price of one today. We're going to do kindness, and then we are going to do goodness. And the reason why we're going to combine the two together is because we start to see in the scriptures that these two words and the meaning behind them, even though they might be a little bit of a difference, but they start to be interconnected. So if you imagine like a Venn, you guys know what a Venn diagram is, right? Go back to school. Yes, good. You, that's good. So a Venn diagram, you have two separate entities and then you have them kind of overlap in the middle, so there's kind of something that's similar in the middle. So let's go ahead and be each one of these words and then look at how they connect with each other, and hopefully we'll come up with a common definition for both of those that we can consider to think about. When we think about the word kindness, because let's go ahead and start there. When we think about the word kindness, I want us to really wrestle this out. Kindness is something that we're reading about in Galatians, right? In the scripture that we just read at the very end of worship, hopefully by this point. But kindness is actually more time in Galatians, which is interesting, right? Now it's written a few other in the book of Romans, which is a closely linked letter of Paul's to Galatians. And the way that he uses it in Romans is very distinctive. He attributes it to God being kind, but he contrasts God's kindness with God's judgment. And what he means by God's judgment is that he is to kind of withhold his kindness so that somebody faces some type of judgment, right? Some type of judgment. And then for the kindness piece, like Romans, what we're talking about, he's talking about very blessing, like a blessing of another human being. So blessing and then a withholding of blessing. So that would be kindness. And he says very clearly in Romans, Paul says very clearly in Romans about God, that God, specifically when he's referencing, humans, he says that nobody under sin, not one of us understand anything kind or good. That is in Romans 3:12. So that's a big statement. I'm going to be revisiting in just a few minutes. But nobody under sin does anything kind or anything. So that's kind. It's really interesting. So blessing, and then if you're withholding it, it's kind of like a judgment. Over here, when you have the word goodness, now very frequently at all, even in the scriptures. And if anything, we see in root form just good, not goodness, but just good. We see in Acts 14, God did good to all nations, even non-Israelite nations, giving them rains from heaven or having them have fruitful seasons where it sounds a lot like Romans 2, which I just spoke about a minute ago, where God was kind to sinful people instead of judging them. In Romans 2, we also read by God's grace do good, as opposed to those in Romans 3 who do not do good or kindness, if we wanted to kind of overlap those words. So basically, when you look at the root of both of these words, they're trying to say something similar. Doing good is part of what these kind of overlap kind of definitions are. So doing good or benefiting from somebody doing good, right? So they're the objects of somebody is benefiting from doing good. Now, if we wanted to tease out these differences for a minute, we could also say that kindness is more associated with the doing part, right? So there's an act that comes out of kindness is more the internal state of who we are. Does that make sense? So there's an action and then there's more of an internal state. Now, if I combine those both together to one simple definition that would include both of those, we could say that it is doing good to others with a sincere desire to benefit them. Okay? So doing good to others with a sincere desire, that's that internal place of a desire to benefit them. There's another word that we could use to kind of encompass this kind of definition. It would be more of a generosity. It feels like it kind of encompasses both of that definition together. Now, if you dig a little bit further in the Greek, which I'm loving, by the way, in this series, because sometimes the words that we are using in this English form, they don't give us the robustness that we need to be able to understand some of these fruits of the Spirit. So if you dig in a little bit more, there's also a word of usefulness that kind of crops up in the Greek, and it is related to both of these words, but it's about usefulness. That there's something that the human or a human should possess when they're exhibiting or they're demonstrating kindness and goodness, that there should be a benefit and a usefulness to what they are giving to another human being. We're walking, happy November, by the way, but we're walking almost all the way to Christmas. The best example that I can use, that I think that it's going to be really fun, you can take it with you, but one of the best examples I can use is the movie, right? How the Grinch Stole Christmas. When we look, you guys seen that? You guys have seen that, right? And we're going to watch it again, like 100 times. I already was in the store yesterday. It's everywhere. You can buy Grinch thing. The story of the Grinch, if you have not heard this or not seen this movie, is that he starts off and he has a really tiny heart. A tiny heart that was like several sizes too small, right? And then by the end, over the course of his progression, dealing with, the actions that he is a part of, he grows feasting, right? And it says at the very end that his heart was enlarged. That is a great example of what kindness and goodness does to the inside. And by the way, just so you think that it's not just a funny little cartoon, this is Bible. This description is in the Bible. We see this in one of my favorite, chapters in the Bible, Psalm 119:32. And it says, I will run in the way of your commandments when you enlarge my heart. So the psalmist says really clearly, God, give me a big heart, and I'm going to serve you, but give me a big heart. Let it swell. Let it enlarge so that I can do the things that you want me to do. What's interesting, though, is that when talking about these fruits of the Spirit and enlarged hearts and having these beautiful fruits kind of show into our life, we have to contrast it with the fruit of the flesh. Because some of us, if we're really, really, really honest, can notice some of these fruits of the flesh maybe a little bit more than the fruits of the Spirit. And I'm not in any way trying to shame anybody. I'm just trying to be honest and say, even in my own life, if I see these little fruits that pop up of the flesh, which very clearly are the fruits that are not connected to the Spirit, what would those be? So if it's the exact opposite of kindness and goodness, what would fruits of the flesh be? I want you to think about that just for a moment. So if we go back to the Grinch movie, right? What was he exhibiting at the beginning of the movie, right? Greed, stinginess, consumption. He didn't see the his people, whatever, they're not people, but he didn't see them, right? Like there was just this transactional type, he was out for himself. There was a selfishness to it. Of thinking would be small-heartedness, right? So he goes from, small-heartedness over the course of the movie to a large heart. And by the way, the small-heartedness kind of aspect or kind of way of thinking creeps its way up into the scriptures again. If we look in Galatians 5, it says, if you bite and devour, watch out that you are not consumed by one another. Your language is so we would think that's about food, right? That's just what we do. That's our bodies start to crave food and that sort of thing. But he's saying something very different here. He's saying if you don't watch what's happening in your life, these fruits of the flesh will make it so that you don't just devour food, you devour people. You devour people. Like you look at them and you want something of them, right? You chew them up, you spit them out, you devour them, you use them. There's a way that we devalue who we are as humans. We start to distance ourselves of the way that we treat human beings. This happens to everybody. This happens to everybody. Have you ever done that where you just look in your life and you're like, oh man, I treat that person in the way that God would have treated that person. I've stopped seeing them as a person. And I was thinking about this week as I was preparing. I'm like, what is that? It's really interesting because I think that we're living in a culture right now that does allow us to distance a little bit, doesn't it? Distance away from the way that we speak to another human being. We don't see the effect of the ways that our words matter to another human being, does it? We've got these little screens where we can say viciously horrible things, right? But we never see the way that somebody receives the things that we say. I think that this concept and this kind of reality of the way we treat human beings, whether you are a large-hearted person or whether you are a small-hearted person, is very vitally important. Now, before I move on, that I need to acknowledge is oftentimes when we're talking about kindness and goodness, you often see this counterfeit version kind of creep its way into the discussion, and it's called niceness, right? Like niceness. We all know nice people, right? Like really, really genuine nice people. But what's happening right now when we're saying that somebody is nice is that they're not malicious, but they're not potent. They're kind of right in the middle. So if they're not small-hearted and they're not large-hearted, where kindness and goodness are coming out of them, they're kind of in the middle. So it's kind of like a heart that's static, like a heart that's just kind of there. Like there's nothing important about the heart. It might just be beating a little bit, but there's nothing there. But if we go back to the way that we see people, because every single one of these hearts acts a little differently. When we go back to the way that we see people, the way that we framed out, the way that we look at people, you've got small-hearted people over here that are out to consume, right? They're using people. They're seeing people not as human, kind of out to be able to receive something from that person. You have the person in the middle that might just be there, that's just kind of a nice, just kind of like nothing. But what's the framework behind that? What is that? And oftentimes when you look at a nice person, that person oftentimes is dealing with fear. Fear of another human being, right? Fear of the boat. Fear of upsetting other human beings. Fear of being too something, right? So a lot of times with niceness, there's fear that's like deeply rooted in that person's heart. Watch over here of the large-hearted person, and the way that they see people is that they love people, that everybody is loved, that there is nobody that escapes from the deep love of God. But how do you get that love? Especially when you know that you are not a loving person naturally, right? How do you get that love? How do you connect to the supreme kind of being that is the most loving? Romans 15 says, let each of us please his neighbor for his good to build him up. When we are kind and loving and other people, when we are expressing the best of ourselves and what God is asking us, we are lifting up human beings to be more in the image of God. That's what we are doing. It is not just to bless them with something, but we are lifting them up into the image of God, and we must be connected to the supreme being of goodness. There is nobody more good, nobody more kind, nobody more loving than God. And as we walk this life with God, and in a room this size, we're all in various forms of, aren't we? But when we walk through this life with God, we come to a place pre-God where we start to realize that we don't possess these things, right? We don't possess goodness and love and kindness There's no way that we can just make that happen on our own. Now, make no mistake, there's a lot of people that do really good things, aren't there? Don't have faith. A lot of good things, but they don't last. They don't have potency to them. They don't have impact oftentimes that we're looking for, right? And part of our pre-journey into life with Christ is getting on our knees and recognizing we have none of that working in our lives. I mean, when is the last time you heard like a celebrity apologize? They apologize. They're caught in something, right? Like they're caught in some type of like naughtiness or, I don't know, something went wrong, right? And they release a statement. And it's like, I'm sorry, but just so you know, that's not who I am. And, I'll do better. I'm really a good person, right? We've all have we given that apology? I'm like, oh yeah, I've given that apology a million times because I want to prove to the other human being that I'm not as bad as maybe that I am in that moment, right? We've all done that, you guys. We've all done that, where we want to posture and we want to argue and we want to say, oh, no, but that's not who I am. The scriptures say something very different. The scriptures say very clearly, you don't have it. You never did have it, and you don't have it. That is very, very clear. Romans 7, I know that nothing good dwells in me. That is, in my flesh. Now, we're kind of dark right now, right? Are you feeling a little sad? You should feel kind of sad, okay? Because, this is the place that we all need to get into, especially as we're exploring faith, right? But, that's not the end. Because when God invites us into this life-giving, intimate journey with Him, it all changes. All of a sudden, we have the opportunity to experience God in all His goodness and kindness. And He starts to put some of that goodness and kindness in our spirits and in our hearts. We start to feel that heart enlarge and become bigger and bigger. The theologian Herman Bavinck said, God is the sum total of all perfections. All virtues are present in Him in an absolute sense. His goodness, accordingly, is one of His absolute perfection. God is good. But yet, if we really go back to the definition of goodness, goodness is something that is internal, and kindness is something that we give out, right? The distinction between God and between us is that God doesn't need our kindness. He doesn't need our kindness. He is the ultimate in kindness. What He asks us to do with our kindness and our goodness, planting deep inside, He says, I don't need that, but what I'm going to encourage you to do and exhort you to do and command you to do is take that goodness and that kindness and give it to your mission field is to give it to other people daily, if not multiple times daily. You're giving it away, you're giving it away, you're giving it away, because this is what the gospel is. This is what the gospel is. So may I remind you that in this journey with Jesus, that God gave us the most ultimate act of kindness in Jesus. He made Jesus this part of who He was, and He wrapped Him and He put Him on this earth. And what Jesus did, He up and He showed kindness all around Him. He turned water into wine for celebration at weddings. He healed lepers and He healed literally like hopeless because their bodies. He healed blind people so that they could see again. He rose people from the dead so that they could have a little bit more life. Jesus gave and demonstrated kindness in so many ways on this earth. And God, in His ultimate kindness, He rose Jesus from the dead, brought Him back into glory to be with goodness forever. So that is our story. That is our story. We see it in depth in our story. We see it embedded in our story, kindness and goodness. And the charge to everybody following God is to do the same thing. To do the same thing. It's to have lives and to build lives and to nurture lives where kindness and goodness are the forefront of what we are offering everybody around us. Now, if you're not convicted by this moment, may I give us just a little bit more of an imagination for how this really looks. And what I want to do is, before I give you just a few different stories, because I would hope that everybody would the doors today and they would have somebody in mind and they would have something concrete that they could do as an act of kindness to another human being. But let me go ahead and just one little thing. And as I was praying this week over this Sunday, I do think it's really important to recognize, and I think God gave me a picture for this, but to recognize that when we are ignoring these fruits of the flesh that I just was talking about, these kind of roots of kind of cynicism or these roots of bitterness or kind of grumpiness or anything like that, right? It literally has to be like a tumor is being cut off in a body. Kind of graphic, I know, okay, but I mean, just bear with me for, or even like somebody that's having like a stomach surgery, right? Like they're kind of like cutting in half their tummy, like a bariatric kind of gastric kind of bypass or whatever. I'm talking like, okay, anyway, you guys know what I'm talking about, right? Half a tummy, right? You got to tie it off, right? I mean, that's exactly what's happening. You got to tie it off. You got to stop allowing the blood flow to be able to come to these cancerous things that are taking your time and your energy. Because there is something connected to fruits of the flesh. And there's ways that we nurture these fruits of the flesh, aren't there? There's things that we're involved in that we meditate on, that we think about, that we give our hearts to, that take our time and our energy in the blood flow that needs to be kind of redirected towards these fruits of the Spirit. And everybody has something different. Everybody has something. It might. I found that just recently I finally had to just stop news intake because every time that I was watching the news, I was filled with so much. It was just horrible. It was one thing after the other, and I kept thinking I need to be more informed. When really I was carrying such a sense of anxiety because of what I was being informed by was like disaster, sadness. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't need to know about things, but I was consuming it at such a rate that it was feeding something that was really, really unpleasant and actually unhelpful. So as I'm pressing in, I'll give you some descriptions, just end with this, but give you some descriptions on kindness and goodness. I also want us to be thinking about and allowing the Lord to speak to us about how he can tie off these things that we've been giving our time and our energy to in order to make room for these new, beautiful, good things that the God wants to provide. So let me just give you a couple different examples, because in the Bible, a lot of different ways that we can be kind and good to other human beings. One of the hardest ones, and I by the way, I fully expect the Lord will speak to you about one of these different versions, right? But one of the hardest ones is calling somebody in a life of sin and calling them to something good and restorative. So asking them to repent and asking them to be restored. We see that all in the New Testament, where Paul is teaching us about with one another, right? But when we watch somebody that's starting to make some super bad decisions, super unhelpful, hurtful decisions, it is an act of kindness to be able to speak to them about what you can see. I'm going to say that one more time. It is an act of kindness to be able to speak to them and lovingly confront them about the things that you are seeing. I remember sitting on my bed, it was a few years back, sitting on my bed shaking because I had found out that somebody dear to me was completely destroying their life. They were leaving their husband. There was no good reason for it. But they were caught in a lot of different things, and that was the way that they were trying to get out of it. And I was shaking. And I texted this person, I said, I really love you. And I'm like, I don't even know the right thing to say. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do this well. And I'm on the phone with them, and my voice is shaking, and I'm shaking, and I'm just stumbling all over my words. But I'll tell you what, when I got off that phone call, I knew that the Lord had asked me to do that. And it says in scriptures, you do this with a spirit of gentleness. And may I remind you that when we lovingly confront our brothers and sisters that are making horrible decisions or that are wreaking havoc on things that are happening, we must always do the internal work so that the goodness propels the kindness coming out of us. That make sense? So we must do the internal work so that we're not testing people. You need to do this and you need to change and shame on you and that sort of thing. But we're people with a gentleness and a kindness. So I think that maybe some of you are aware of different people around you that you need to go to and have a loving, gentle, and firm conversation about what you are seeing in their life. Another way that we experience or we can participate in kindness would be positive instruction. Now, this is an interesting one because every single person in this room has something that they can teach another human being. This could be a gift that God has given you. This could be a way God has, given you a grace to be able to learn something. It could be the gift of listening to another human being. But everybody has something that they can give to another human being that they have. One of the most pivotal stories in my life, sitting in college, and I had gotten the freaking credit card that those little stands on campuses have, and I had gotten it because they probably gave me a free t-shirt or something like that. I don't know. College kids lose their mind. They're like, free pizza, yeah, I'll go ahead and sign up for a credit card, right? So I got in the credit card, and then before you know it, I'm like, I think I need this, I need a better interview outfit. I need that, whatever. And before you know it, it's the balance is creeping up, a couple jobs, I'm going to school, and I'm starting to panic. And I sat down with somebody that was a mentor / kind of father figure for me. I sat down in this complete, humiliated mess. And I sat in front of them, and I'm like, I've gotten myself in trouble, and I don't know what to do. And I'm crying, and I'm like, I don't know what to do. And they knew that I came from a family that was horribly dysfunctional literacy. They did not, my parents did not teach us. If anything, we got into a ton of trouble, with debt and that sort of thing. And so whatever I was not positive was very bad, and I did not know how to manage money. I will never forget my friend, he's my friend now, my kind of father figure. He walked into the back office and came back, and he had a check. And he wrote on the check, and he said, Danielle, how much do you owe the credit card company? And I'm like, $570. Back then it was so much money, $100, I'm dying, And he wrote the check, $570. And he slid it across the table to me and said, this will clear the debt for you. But then secondly, you are responsible from this moment on for your own learning journey. You cannot claim ignorance anymore. And this is going to be hard, and you're going to have to work at it, and I will help. And anytime you call me, I will help you learn how to balance budgets and blah, blah, blah. All the different things. And I walk out of there, and it was such a generous act of kindness. And it pushed through all the shame, right? Because sometimes when we have to sit in postures of learning from another human being, we feel weird and bad and shameful and that sort of thing. Can I just say that is way. This is kindness that we show other people. It's kindness when we receive instruction from others. Just quickly, we've got serving. There's a lot of people in this church, they show kindness by the way that they serve. I know it because I know many. You spend your weekends and your holidays and you open your homes to people that hospitable meal and an interaction. When you hear things that are happening in the life of the church, it's not a matter of putting it on your calendar, but you actually are like, how can we pull that off together? Right? So serving in your community, serving in your neighborhood, serving in schools, serving in your church is a beautiful act of kindness. We've got bearing burdens. Some of you are really good about bearing burdens with other people. And what I mean by that would mean that you're able to interact with somebody and carry some of the load for them. You're carrying some of the load to where they're not just hunched over and feeling it all by themselves, isolated, but you're bearing some of the load with them. Just this week, I was sitting and I had about an hour conversation with a colleague who's a very, very dear friend. And I was just emptying, we working through budgets and problems and, goals and all the sorts of things, right? I've got my list that I'm working through, and at the very end of the conversation, my friend looks at me over Zoom and he said, "That was great. That was great. That was really helpful, super productive. But let me just say this, like, how are you doing? Like, how?" And I was completely caught off guard. And it was interesting the way that the emotion kind of rose up inside of me, right? He's asking me how I'm doing. I don't have many people that ask me that very often, and I'm like, actually, my grandma did go into hospice this last week, and I'm bearing the weight of family right now, and like, how do I get back to Ohio quickly, and how start, I'm just like going, whatever. He didn't stop there. He said, "Can I pray for you right now?" And he just ended by just saying, "Lord, we need you to step in here. We need you to give the peace and the grace and that sort of thing to Danielle right now." I left that conversation, I'm like, I had somebody that bore it now for me. He bore it. He sat there. He didn't own it, but he just bore it with me, bore that burden for me. There are people all around you, maybe that need somebody to enter into their journey so you can help bear the weight. And the last thing I want to mention would be household of faith. It says really clearly in the scriptures that there is something really important about being kind and good to the people in your spiritual community. That there are people in this room looking all around, just look all around you, that they need kindness and goodness. As brothers and sisters, that is a call of us, not only just people that don't have faith, but to do it within our church. Pivotal moments that I ever had was when I was a young mom and I was at a conference. My husband and I were young pastors. We got ourselves there. I could afford it, and we brought our 2 little girls, and I've got this little girl that was probably about 6 months old, my youngest, who was a little koala at the time. I could not get her off of me. She was just a and every time I would put her in the kids area so that my husband and I could attend one of these sessions where we were wanting to be trained and encouraged and exhorted and whatever, up comes on the end of the screen, will the parents of blah, 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 please come and get her? In my mind, I grew to she's out of control. But anyway, no, it was just a little number, right? Coming by the end of it was probably about midway through the conference, everybody knew that it was the same number being over and over and over again, okay? The same, at this point, they could have just used her name, everyone's turning around to us, it's her again, and I'd go, and we were just taking turns. I'm like, "It's your turn now, buddy," and he'd be like, "It's your turn now," so we're just taking turns, whatever. And we walked out to lunch after, and we were having serious conversation, should we just hop on the plane and go back home? Because this was a waste. It was a waste of time. I'm like, this is just, we could do it. We don't have childcare back in Denver. We thought we could do it. And I was sitting on the berm outside of the church. I was sitting on the berm, all the bags and the strollers and my babies around me. I get the car to pull up, and I swear to God, it was an angel in human form, came up to me. This woman came up to me. She was a little bit older. She came up to me and she goes, "Honey," and she sat down next to me. I do not know who she is. Never have seen her before again. She said, "Honey, I notice you. I notice you right now. And this life stage that you are in is really hard. Really hard. And I just want to say to you that it's precious and that God sees everything, and it's just really hard. I encourage you to keep going, to keep putting your head up every day, you and your husband, you're going to get, God will give you everything that you need. And I just want to say, it's really good that you're here. It's really good, and God's going to meet you in the midst of all this stuff. It's not like maybe even anything will get better, but God's going to meet you crying. I'm like, oh my God, And I walk away, and Jay's like, who were you just talking to, as we get in the car. And I'm like, an angel, it was this lady angel, that came, and somehow she just knew, and maybe it's because I just looked, no idea, but she came and she spoke to me in the exact right moment. That moment changed my entire life. It gave me eyes to be able to see so many other people that while they won't speak out loud what is happening, you can just kind of notice and discern. And honestly, even if you can't notice and discern, and you're a person that's like, I don't discern, speaking out loud and giving kindness to another human being will never be bad. It will never be bad. How could it be bad? People are starved for kindness. They're starved. Even if you don't know how to take it all in, it's never bad to give kindness. Goodness of your heart. So let me just wrap up with this. This week, God's going to give you opportunity for kindness. He will. He already is. He might even give it to you on the way home from church. He might give it to you in this church building before you even leave. Would you have the eyes and the ears to be able to respond? Would you have the courage to be able to speak out loud? Would you have the bravery to be able to do that? And would you have moments along this week that you would sit with Jesus and ask him by the Spirit, with the goodness that can only come from him, to empower you to be able to be a kind person? Amen? Okay, let's go ahead and stand.